$50. It was never about the money. It was a test, a painful test my late husband had instructed me to perform to see people's true character. And that day, amidst my daughter's silence and my son-in-law's cruel scorn, I received the most bitter answer. This is the true story of how my dignity shattered, only to be rebuilt upon a truth they never suspected. In the house where they considered me a burden, they were sitting at the table with a millionaire. If you are listening from anywhere in the world, leave a comment and subscribe, because some truths need to be spread, even if they shake your beliefs. Some stories, no matter how painful, must be told. James's words still echoed in my head as I watched his thick hands gesture with irritation. Hands that had never known the real weight of manual labor, always soft and scented with that expensive lotion he religiously applied every morning. A bank manager at Wells Fargo for 15 years, he thought he was the master of financial truth, but he had no idea he was sitting at the table with a woman who had more money than he would ever see in his life. $50, Mrs. Mary, he continued, his voice rising an octave, as if I were deaf. Don't you think it's time you stopped being a burden? Instead of knitting all day, why don't you get a job? Each word was a stone thrown at my soul. Me, who at 74 still had steady hands and a clear mind, being treated like a nuisance, like something to be discarded. I watched my daughter again, Patricia, my only child, the fruit of my womb, raised with so much love and sacrifice. She continued to chew in silence, her shoulders slumped forward, as if she wanted to disappear inside her beige silk blouse. Mom is only asking for $50, James, she murmured, almost inaudible, without lifting her eyes from her plate. $50 here, $50 there, and at the end of the month, it's $500, $600. James slammed his fist on the table, making the water glasses tremble. Your mother needs to understand that we are not a bank. We already do more than our duty by giving her a roof over her head and food to eat. A roof and food. As if I were an inconvenient pet they didn't have the heart to abandon on the street. I felt the heat rise to my face, not from shame, but from a dull, deep anger I hadn't felt in a long time. An anger that reminded me of who I really was before I agreed to live in the shadows of that house. I had come to live with them 8 months ago, right after the sale of Robert's visible assets was completed. The little house in Mesa had been sold for $320,000, a sum that was left entirely to me, as Robert had stipulated in his will. The old auto repair shop was also sold for $210,000 to a trusted former employee who paid in cash and took over all commitments. For James and Patricia, this confirmed their suspicions. I was just the lower middle-class widow of a mechanic, dependent on a $2,800 monthly death benefit from the Social Security Administration. What they didn't know was that I had discreetly invested the $530,000 from the property sales into CDs at major banks, which yielded me another $3,200 a month. My real income was $6,000 a month, not the $2,800 they imagined, but even that amount they considered insufficient for me to have the luxury of asking to borrow $50. You need to get a clue, Mrs. Mary, James continued, now in a tone he probably considered pedagogical. Life isn't easy for anyone. I work from 7 the morning to 9 at night. Patricia takes care of the house and the kids all day, and you just sit in your little world, knitting and watching television. Knitting and television. That's how he summed up my existence. He didn't know that every morning, while they slept, I opened my laptop and meticulously tracked the movements of my 401k and my other investments. He didn't know that I had monthly contact with Dr. John Medeiros about investment strategies and that I studied the financial market with the dedication Robert had taught me. He didn't know that I was just waiting for the right moment to show them who they really were. James, please, Patricia tried again, her voice a thin thread of protest. No, Patricia, enough pity. Your mother is 74, not 94. She is perfectly capable of working. There are plenty of people her age working out there. I remained silent, my hands crossed in my lap, observing every micro-expression on his face. James was enjoying this moment of power, the sadistic pleasure of humiliating someone he considered defenseless. I saw the poorly disguised sadism in his small, dark eyes, the satisfaction of someone who had finally found an outlet for his professional frustrations. Because James was frustrated. That I knew. In recent months, I had observed his tense phone calls, the worried whispers with Patricia about unmet goals at the bank, about the fierce competition from online banks, about corporate clients who weren't renewing contracts. I had seen the bills piling up on the kitchen table, the arguments about cutting costs, about maybe changing cars, about canceling the kids' gym memberships. And now, faced with his own inability to solve his professional problems, he was taking it out on me. The inconvenient mother-in-law who lived off his charity in his house, eating his food, using his water, his electricity. I was the perfect scapegoat. You know what it is, Mary? He leaned toward me, his breath smelling of coffee and resentment. You think you're still the queen of the block just because you were married to your Robert. Well, newsflash, your husband is dead. The royalty is over. Now you're just another old woman who needs to work to support herself. The mention of Robert was the last straw. I felt something break inside me, like a dam giving way after years of holding back the water. My husband, my partner of 47 years of marriage, being used as ammunition in the mouth of that petty, cowardly man. Slowly, I picked up my purse from the chair beside me and stood up. My knees protested a little, but I managed to keep my posture erect. I looked at James, then at my daughter, who had finally lifted her eyes from her plate and was staring at me with a mixture of embarrassment and a silent plea. Very well, I said, my voice coming out firmer than I expected. Very well indeed. Without another word, I went to my room. I could feel their eyes glued to my back as I climbed the stairs with all the dignity I had left. Behind me, I heard Patricia whisper something that sounded like, "Now you've gone too far." But James's response was an unintelligible mumble. I closed my bedroom door, and for the first time in 8 months in that house, I turned the key in the lock. The lock made a dry, final click. That wasn't just the sound of a door being locked. It was the sound of me locking away the old woman I had become, the silent, complacent one. In that moment, I felt a piece of Robert's strength return to me. The time for waiting was over. The time for action had begun. That wasn't just the sound of a lock. It was the sound of a plan clicking into place. Mary is no longer a victim in her own story, and her very next move will set in motion a machine of justice that her family never saw coming. You won't want to miss the phone call that changes everything. I sat on the edge of the bed, breathing deeply, trying to process what had just happened. It wasn't a surprise, not exactly. I knew this day would come. Robert had prepared me for it. Mary, he told me one afternoon, a few months before he passed, as we were resting on the porch of our little house. One day, you're going to find out what kind of person our daughter has really become. And when that day comes, you have to be prepared to make the tough decisions. At the time, I thought he was being too pessimistic. Patricia was our only daughter, our princess, the girl we raised with so much love and dedication. How could she disappoint us? Now I knew. I picked up my cell phone and opened the banking app. There it was, the balance James would never imagine. $2,150,000. It was the result of decades of Robert's smart and discreet investments, a sum that was constantly growing and securing my future, far beyond what my monthly Social Security check could provide. For a moment, I felt an almost irresistible urge to go downstairs and throw that information in James's face, to see the shock in his small, malicious eyes, the disbelief, the despair as he realized the magnitude of the mistake he had made. But Robert had taught me better than that. The revenge of the poor is loud and useless, Mary, he used to say. True strength is silent and definitive. I put my phone back in my purse and went to the small closet Patricia had set up for me. I pulled out the bottom drawer of the dresser, and from inside an old pillowcase, I took out my little phone book. I looked for the name I needed, Dr. John Medeiros, a lawyer specializing in estate planning and an old friend of Robert's. Robert had introduced me to Dr. Savin Medeiros 5 years before he died, on an afternoon when he decided to lay all the cards on the table about our financial situation. Mary, if I ever go first and you need help, this is the man you should talk to. He knows everything. He will take care of you. I dialed the number with slightly trembling fingers. Dr. John Medeiros' office. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. I'd like to speak with Dr. Medeiros, please. This is Mary, Robert's widow. One moment, Mrs. Mary. I'll transfer you to him immediately. My heart was pounding in my chest. It was time to put into practice everything Robert had taught me about true power. The power that comes not from ostentation or arrogance, but from knowledge and patience. Mrs. Mary. Dr. Medeiros' warm voice filled my ears. How are you? It's been a while. Dr. Medeiros. I took a deep breath. It's time. There was a pause on the other end of the line. When he spoke again, his tone had changed, becoming more serious, more professional. I understand perfectly, Mrs. Mary. Your husband told me this day might come. Are you all right? Are you safe? I'm fine, doctor, but I'm not safe anymore. Not in this house. I understand. Can you come to my office tomorrow morning? We have a lot to talk about and many important decisions to make. Yes, I can. What time? At 10 o'clock. And Mrs. Mary? Bring all the documents your husband left with you. We'll need them. I hung up the phone with a strange feeling in my chest. It wasn't exactly relief, nor was it anxiety. It was a kind of cold determination, as if a part of me that had been dormant for 8 months had finally woken up. Hanging up that phone, I knew I had just set in motion a machine that could not be stopped. There was no turning back. A part of me was anxious, yes, but a larger part felt a clear-headed resolve I hadn't felt in years. This wasn't for revenge. This was for dignity. This was for Robert. I went to my bedroom window and opened the curtains. Down below, in the perfectly manicured backyard, my grandchildren were playing in the pool. Emma, 8, was trying to teach her younger brother, Noah, 5, how to do a starfish in the water. Their laughter floated up to my window like pure, innocent music. My heart ached. The children were the only good thing in that house, the only ones who still treated me with the affection and spontaneity I remembered. But they were also being raised in that environment of materialism and contempt for the most vulnerable. A soft knock on the door pulled me from my thoughts. Mom? It was Patricia's voice, small and hesitant. Can I come in? I opened the door to find my daughter in the hallway, her eyes red, her hands wringing the hem of her blouse. She looked like a child who had done something wrong and was now facing the consequences. Mom, I wanted to apologize. James was stressed because of work and he took it out on you. He took it out on me. I completed the sentence for her. Yes, that's what happened. She looked down again, but he didn't mean it, you know? Sometimes he speaks without thinking when he's nervous. I watched my daughter, this 6-year-old woman, still trying to justify her husband's behavior as if she were a teenager in love. Patricia had become a shadow of her former self over the years, always walking on tiptoe so as not to irritate James, always apologizing for things that weren't her fault. Patricia, I said, placing my hand on her face, do you really believe what he said to me was okay? She hesitated, and in that hesitation, I saw everything I needed to see. My daughter knew it was wrong, but she didn't have the courage to confront her husband. She had chosen temporary domestic peace over her own mother's dignity. I know the situation is difficult, Mom. The bank is putting a lot of pressure on James. He's afraid of losing his job. And that justifies him calling me a lazy old woman? No, of course not, she hurried to reply. It was horrible, I know. But he'll apologize. You'll see. No, he won't, Patricia. And even if he did, some words can't be taken back. They've already been said. We stood there, mother and daughter, facing each other in the silent hallway. I could hear the sound of the television downstairs, probably James watching the game, as if nothing had happened. What are you going to do, Mom? The question hung in the air between us. What was I going to do? For the first time in 8 months, I finally knew the answer to that question. I'm going to take care of my own life, my daughter, the way your father taught me. The next morning, I woke up before sunrise, as I always had since Robert passed away 2 years and 3 months ago. The silence of the early morning was my sacred time, when I could think clearly, without the interference of the outside world. I made my coffee, a ritual I had kept religiously for decades, and sat at the small breakfast nook in my room with my laptop open. It was Wednesday, 6 a.m. Downstairs, the house was still asleep. James wouldn't wake up until 7:15 for his long, meticulous shower, and Patricia would get up at 7:30 to prepare the children's breakfast before school. I had 1 hour and 15 minutes of absolute peace. I opened my email and found the message I was expecting from Dr. Medeiros. Mrs. Mary, I confirm our meeting at 10. I have already separated all the documents related to Robert's planning and prepared some proposals for our conversation. Sincerely, John Medeiros. I closed the laptop and leaned back in my chair, letting the memories flood in. It was impossible to think about the future without revisiting the past, without remembering how we got to this point. I met Robert when I was 25, and he was 29. I was working as a secretary in an accounting office in downtown Phoenix, and he showed up one day with greasy hands and a shy smile, needing help with the paperwork for the small auto repair shop he had just bought from a former boss in Mesa. "Sorry to bother you, miss," he said, taking off a worn-out cap. "It's just that I don't understand any of this paperwork, and the accountant told me you could explain it to me. It wasn't love at first sight, not the kind you see in the movies. It was something more subtle, deeper, an immediate connection, an ease of conversation that surprised me." Robert had a natural intelligence that compensated for his lack of formal education and a brutal honesty that was both charming and intimidating. "I can't read very well," he confessed to me the third time we met. "I dropped out in the 4th grade to help my dad in his shop. But I know how to count money, and I know when someone is trying to cheat me." And how he knew. Over the years, I watched Robert grow from a mechanic with a small shop to the owner of the most respected establishment in Mesa. It wasn't because he was the cheapest, but because he was the most honest and competent. "Your car doesn't need that," he would tell customers who wanted to replace unnecessary parts. "Save that money for something more important." But the big discovery about Robert came years after we were married, when I realized he had a natural talent for investing that would make any bank manager envious. While other mechanics spent their profits on drinking and gambling, Robert studied the financial market with the same dedication he studied engines. "Mary," he explained one night, spreading newspaper clippings on the kitchen table, "money is like an engine. If you understand how it works, you can make it yield much more than seems possible." And he understood. He started by buying some shares of solid companies he knew, like General Electric, AT&T, and Wells Fargo. Then he moved on to conservative mutual funds. Years later, he discovered 401(c)s and Roth IRAs and fell in love with the idea of a private retirement plan that wouldn't go through probate and would be transferred directly to the beneficiary. "Listen here, Mary," he said one Sunday afternoon, after a long conversation with Dr. Medeiros. "If I ever die first, you won't have to share this money with anyone. A 401(k) doesn't go to probate. It's yours, only yours, quick and clean." "Why do you keep talking about these morbid things, Robert?" I protested at the time. "You're as healthy as a horse." "Because I need to plan, woman. I need to take care of you even after I'm gone." And he did. For over 30 years, religiously, Robert deposited the majority of the substantial profits from the shop into the 401(k). It wasn't just leftover money, it was significant, calculated, and planned resources. He lived with the essentials and invested the rest intelligently and consistently. "People will think we're poor," I complained once, when he refused to trade our old car for a newer model. "Better that way," he smiled. "A rich person who looks poor stays rich. A poor person who looks rich gets poorer." A wise phrase that I only fully understood after he was gone. The illness arrived as all illnesses do, by surprise, without warning, without asking for permission. One day, Robert complained of a persistent pain in his stomach. A week later, he was in the hospital having tests. A month later, we received the diagnosis that would change our lives forever. Pancreatic cancer, advanced stage. "How long?" he asked the doctor with the same simplicity he would ask about the deadline to fix an engine. "Between 4 and 8 months, depending on the response to treatment." Robert nodded, squeezed my hand, and just said, "Then let's make these months count." And they did. The last 6 months of my husband's life were the most intense we ever lived together, not because of trips or adventures. He was too weak for that, but because of the conversations, long, deep conversations about everything that truly mattered. It was during this period that he explained our real financial situation to me in detail. The 401k, which was approaching $2 million, the smaller supplementary investments in blue-chip stocks and conservative funds that totaled about $150,000, the strategy for the funds from the future sale of the properties. Everything organized, everything planned, everything thought out to give me security and independence. "Mary, you're going to find out who people really are when I'm gone," he told me one afternoon, his voice weak but his gaze still intense. "Patricia, I hope she surprises you positively, but if she doesn't, you have to be prepared." "What do you mean by that?" "I mean that sometimes we raise a snake thinking we're raising a bird." Patricia married that James because he promised her an easy life. She never really worked, never worried about real money. When she finds out you have much more than she imagined, will she be happy for you, or will she be angry that you didn't share it before? He paused, breathing with difficulty. "Do a test, Mary. When you feel ready, ask them for a little help, something that would make no difference in their budget, but would be a favor to you. Their reaction will show you who they really are." At the time, I thought Robert was being unfair to our daughter. Patricia had always been affectionate, always took good care of the children, always visited us regularly. How could she disappoint us? Now I knew. The test had been administered, and the results were crystal clear. "And there's another thing, Mary," he continued in that same conversation. "When you ask for that small favor, calculate how much that money would yield per day in the 401k. When they find out the truth, you can tell them exactly the daily amount they lost because of their pettiness." I picked up my phone and did the calculation Robert had taught me. The 401k yielded 3.6% per year. $50 would yield $1.80 per year, which is less than a cent per day. Practically nothing. They had lost access to over $2 million because of half a cent a day. The sound of footsteps in the hallway pulled me from my memories. It was 7:15, James getting up for his shower. Soon the house would be fully awake, and I needed to be prepared for another day of theater, pretending to be the poor, dependent mother-in-law. But today would be different. Today I would start to put into practice the plan Robert had designed for me, step by step, with the patience of someone who knows that true victory comes not from haste, but from strategy. I put on my simplest clothes, faded black pants and a purple blouse that had seen better days. It was important to keep up appearances until the right moment. I combed my hair into a low bun and looked at myself in the mirror. A 4-year-old woman, seemingly ordinary, seemingly defenseless. Appearances can be deceiving. Robert always said that. I went down for breakfast with the family, carrying my small purse, where I kept the essential documents Robert had left me, organized in a discreet folder. James was at the table reading financial news on his tablet while munching on toast with light cream cheese. Patricia was preparing the children's lunchboxes as they ran back and forth, looking for backpacks, notebooks, sneakers. "Good morning," I murmured softly, pouring myself some coffee. James briefly looked up from his tablet, gave a nod that could be interpreted as a greeting, and went back to his financial market news. Patricia looked at me with that guilty expression of someone who still felt bad about what had happened the day before. "Good morning, Mom. Did you sleep well?" "Yes, I did. Thank you." I sat at the end of the table, in the place that had become my silent territory for the past 8 months. I drank my coffee slowly, observing the morning family dynamic that would repeat for only a few more days. Emma ran up to me and gave me a kiss on the cheek. "Grandma, are you picking us up from school today?" "I don't know yet, my love. Grandma has an appointment this morning." "What kind of appointment?" The question came from James, with a slightly ironic tone, as if the appointments of retired old women were intrinsically irrelevant. "Doctor," I lied naturally. "Routine checkup. Tests." "Oh," he went back to his tablet, completely uninterested. An elderly woman's doctor's appointment was not a subject worthy of his attention. At 8:30, the house emptied as always. James left first, always in a hurry, always carrying that air of importance that bank managers cultivate. Then, Patricia took the children to school in an organized rush of lunchboxes, backpacks, and hurried kisses. The house fell silent, just me and the blessed silence of solitude. Linda would only arrive on Thursday. She was a woman in her 52nd, hard-working and discreet, who already knew the ins and outs of domestic life in that condominium. She had been working in that house for almost 2 years, 3 times a week, and I had noticed over the months that she watched with growing attention how James treated me, always with an uncomfortable expression on her face. Linda had a keen perception of family dynamics, the fruit of decades working in different houses. Just last week, as I was rinsing my coffee cup in the sink, Linda had quietly come beside me to dry the dishes. "You have very kind hands, Mrs. Mary," she'd said, her voice low, not looking at me directly. "The way you knit for the children. It reminds me of my own mother." It was a simple comment, but in this house starved of warmth, it felt like a lifeline. It was a small acknowledgement that I was seen, that my quiet existence had value to someone. It was a flicker of light in the growing shadows. At 9:30, I ordered an Uber through the app. While I waited for the car to arrive, I felt a mixture of anxiety and determination coursing through my veins. It was like standing on the edge of a cliff, knowing I had to jump, but with the certainty that there was a safety net waiting for me below. Dr. Medeiros' office was in Scottsdale, in a discreet but well-located and well-maintained commercial building. During the 50-minute ride in the morning traffic, I watched Phoenix through the car window, the city where I had spent my entire life, where I met my husband, where I raised my daughter, where I built my story. Soon, maybe it would be time to write a new chapter of that story. Dr. John Medeiros was a man in his mid-62nd, with completely gray, well-cut hair, thin gold-rimmed glasses, and a gentle smile that conveyed both professional and personal confidence. His office was elegant without being ostentatious. Dark wood furniture, shelves full of law books, diplomas, and certifications on the walls. "Mrs. Mary, what a pleasure to see you again," he said, standing up to greet me with a firm, warm handshake. "Please, have a seat. Can I offer you coffee, tea?" "I'll have a coffee." "Thank you." While he prepared the coffee in a modern, quiet machine that occupied a corner of the room, I took the opportunity to observe the environment better. On his desk was a folder with my name typed on it. He had evidently prepared carefully for our meeting. "How have you been, Mrs. Mary? I know the last few months haven't been easy." "They've been educational," I replied, choosing my words carefully. He handed me the cup of coffee, an excellent coffee, much better than the watery stuff they drank at Patricia's house, and sat in the armchair across from mine, opening the folder with precise movements. "Robert was a very intelligent man and extremely concerned about your future. He came to me several times over the years, always wanting to be absolutely sure that his plans were legally correct and financially sound. He told me you talked a lot before he passed." "We talked a lot, yes, and he made me solemnly promise that if you ever needed it, I would do everything in my power to help you, following exactly the instructions he left." Dr. Medeiros opened the folder and began to flip through the organized documents. He also told me there would be very clear signs of when that day would come. "And it has come," I said simply. "Tell me exactly what happened." I recounted the episode of the Tuesday lunch in full detail. James's exact words, Patricia's reaction, the disrespect, the deliberate humiliation. Dr. Medeiros listened in absolute silence, occasionally making precise notes on a notepad. "I understand perfectly, Mary. Your husband described exactly this type of situation as the definitive trigger for the measures we planned together." "What measures?" He smiled with the confidence of someone who had prepared everything down to the smallest detail and pulled the first document from the folder. "First, let's review your current financial situation. The main 401k has a balance of $2,150,000. Correct. In addition, you have the supplementary investments in blue-chip stocks and conservative funds, which total approximately $150,000. And finally, the $530,000 from the property sales, which you've invested in CDs. Dr. Medeiros looked at me over his glasses. "This brings your total net worth to approximately $2,830,000, not including your monthly income of $6,000 from Social Security and the CD yields. Hearing the full, consolidated number, stated so clearly, gave me a renewed sense of the security Robert had built for me. Now let's move on to the measures we can implement immediately, he continued, his voice taking on a more executive tone. First question. Do you wish to move out of your daughter's house? I do. Perfect. I've already identified some interesting options for properties to buy in cash, all in neighborhoods with good infrastructure and close to parks. 3-bedroom apartments, obviously paid for in full at the time of purchase. The idea of having my own house again, my own space, my own rules, filled me with a joy I hadn't felt in many months. Second question, he proceeded. Your husband strongly suggested that you consider creating a foundation in his name, dedicated to specific social projects. He left very detailed guidelines on how he would like his resources to be applied in life by you. And what kind of projects? Mainly vocational education for young people in situations of social vulnerability, technical courses, workshops in mechanics, electronics, computer programming. Your husband always dreamed of helping other young people, like he was one day, without opportunities for formal education but with intelligence and a will to work. I felt my eyes fill with tears. Even after death, Robert was still taking care of me and still found a generous way to give back to the world everything he had received. And third question, Dr. Medeiros paused significantly. There is the crucial issue of your current will. My will? Exactly. At the moment, according to the document we made 2 years ago, your daughter Patricia is the sole heir to all your assets. Considering what you've told me about her behavior and especially that of your son-in-law, I want to change it, I said without any hesitation. I want to change everything. Doctor. Medeiros nodded gravely, as if he expected exactly that answer. Very well. Then let's draw up a completely new will. You can leave a portion for your daughter, say $500,000, enough for her to maintain a dignified and comfortable, but not luxurious or parasitic, standard of living. The substantial majority can be designated directly to your grandchildren, through a trust they can only access when they come of age, and to the charitable foundation. $500,000 represents how much of the total? It represents just under 18% of your current assets, a significant amount that ensures she will never be in need, but it does not grant her the power to maintain her current lifestyle at your expense. The math was perfectly fair. Patricia would be well taken care of financially, but not rich enough to continue supporting her husband's parasitic and arrogant lifestyle. And when she finds out about the change in the will, Mrs. Mary. Dr. Medeiros smiled with a calculated glint in his eyes. That's the most interesting and educational part of the plan your husband devised with us. You're not just going to change the will in silence. You're going to officially communicate that you've changed it. What do you mean? You're going to tell them directly that you've discovered exactly who they really are and that you've taken the appropriate and definitive measures. You're going to make it absolutely clear that the disrespect had concrete and permanent consequences. Your husband called it a lesson in applied dignity. A lesson in applied dignity. Typical of Robert, turning justice into lasting education. When can we start implementing all of this? Today, if you wish. I can prepare all the legal documents by Friday. You can move next week if you want. And the official communication, leave that to me as well. I'll prepare a formal letter on the firm's letterhead, explaining in detail the changes to your assets and will. An official document that makes it crystal clear that this is not a passing emotional impulse, but a mature and well-founded legal decision. I left Dr. Medeiros' office with a sense of lightness and power I hadn't experienced in a long time. It was as if a gigantic, suffocating weight had been lifted from my shoulders forever. For the first time since Robert's death, I felt truly in control of my own life. As the Uber drove me away from that office, I looked out the window at the city where I had lived my entire life. For 8 long months, I had felt like a ghost in it. But now, for the first time since Robert passed, I felt like I was finally coming home to myself. In the Uber on the way home, I mentally calculated the numbers I would use at the moment of the revelation. $50 in the 401k would yield about half a cent per day, half a cent daily. Their pettiness had cost them access to $2,300,000 for half a cent a day. That night, I called Linda. "Linda, it's Mrs. Mary. Can you do me an important favor?" "Of course, Mrs. Mary. What do you need?" "When Patricia gets home tomorrow, tell her I'm going to be away for the rest of this week, taking care of urgent personal matters. Tell her I'll be back on Saturday afternoon." "Of course, Mrs. Mary. Can I ask if everything is all right with you?" "Everything is perfect, my dear. For the first time in a long time, everything is absolutely perfect." The next 3 days were the most strategic and liberating of my life since Robert's death. While Patricia and James believed I was taking care of urgent personal matters, an excuse they accepted without question, after all, what truly important matters could a 74-year-old retired widow have? I was, in fact, orchestrating one of the most significant and well-planned changes of my existence. The next 3 days were a whirlwind of decisive action. Guided by Dr. Medeiros, I didn't waste a moment. We viewed properties, and by Thursday afternoon, I had found it. A sun-drenched apartment on the 8th floor, with a balcony overlooking a lively park. When the agent quoted the price, I looked him in the eye. "I'll take it," I said, my voice steady, "for cash." The man's shock was a small, satisfying preview of what was to come. With the paperwork in motion, I spent Friday making quiet, deliberate choices. A comfortable armchair for my knitting, a sturdy bed, 2 small beds for the grandchildren's room. Each choice was not just a purchase. It was a brick being laid in the foundation of my new life. A life built on my terms, with my resources, for my own peace. 2 hours later, I had made the down payment and officially started the process of buying an apartment that would give me the freedom and dignity I hadn't felt in 8 long, suffocating months. More than that, I would have a home again, a place that would be truly and completely mine, where no one could ever call me a dead weight, a lazy old woman, or any other insult. While Dr. Medeiros meticulously took care of the first bureaucratic details, I walked alone on the empty balcony of the apartment, imagining how I would furnish it with care and without haste. A comfortable armchair near the window, where I could do my knitting while watching the peaceful movement of the park. A small but functional table for the laptop, where I would continue to track my investments without interference. One of the smaller bedrooms would be transformed into a special space for my grandchildren's visits. A kitchen all my own, where I could prepare my meals at my own pace, without pressure, without judgment, without malicious comments, and, above all, a home where I would be treated with the respect and consideration that every human being deserves, regardless of age or apparent financial situation. On Friday, I took the opportunity to research furniture and some basic but good quality appliances. I didn't want exaggerated luxury or ostentation, just the well-chosen essentials to feel truly at home when the move became a reality. A comfortable bed with a suitable orthopedic mattress, a simple but cozy sofa in neutral tones, a dining table for 4, some more modern basic appliances. In the smaller bedroom, I planned to install a trundle bed and a small desk. It would be the grandchildren's room for when Emma and Noah came to visit. What moved me the most was when I chose 2 special armchairs for the living room. One for me, where I would spend many happy hours knitting and reading, and another that would always be available for visitors or for when I wanted to mentally converse with Robert in my moments of longing. I knew he would approve of every careful choice I was making. Late Friday afternoon, I called the school where my grandchildren studied. "Grandma!" Emma's excited, crystal-clear voice filled my ears through the cell phone. "When are you coming back? I miss you so much." "Soon, my princess. Grandma is taking care of a very special surprise for you." "What kind of surprise?" "Tell me, Grandma." "Ah, it's a real surprise, but you'll like it very, very much, and you'll be able to visit Grandma whenever you want, without bothering anyone." I also talked to Noah, who could barely form complete sentences from so much anxiety, to tell me about a drawing he had made in art class that he urgently wanted to show me. The children were pure, innocent, without the layers of malice, interest, and calculation that adults develop with time and disappointments. They loved me for who I was as a person and as a grandmother, not for what they thought I might leave them in the future. On Saturday morning, I returned to the Scottsdale house, knowing it would be one of the last times I would enter that place as a resident. It was strange to walk through the corridors, climb that staircase, enter the room that had been my refuge for the past few months, knowing that in a few days all this would be just an uncomfortable memory of the past. Everything seemed smaller, more artificial, colder, and more impersonal than I remembered. Or maybe I had completely changed my perspective after 3 days of total freedom and planning for my independent future. I found Patricia in the kitchen preparing Saturday breakfast with more care than usual. Toast, cut fruit, fresh orange juice. She turned when she heard me come in, and I saw the genuine relief stamped on her face. "Mom, it's so good you're back. How were your affairs? Did you manage to sort everything out?" "They were sorted," I replied simply, pouring myself coffee without much ceremony. That's good. James was saying that maybe you two should have a talk. He recognizes he went too far on Tuesday and wants to apologize properly. Interesting how Patricia always spoke for others, as if she were the official family spokesperson. James recognized he had exaggerated and wanted to apologize, but apparently he wasn't capable of coming to talk to me personally. Typical behavior of someone who expects others to solve the problems he himself created. Where is he now? Still sleeping. Yesterday was that get-together with the people from the bank. You know how it is. He came home late and a bit cheerful. No, I didn't know how it was, because Robert never came home drunk, never used alcohol as an excuse for bad behavior, never left me waiting while he had fun with his friends at expensive bars. But I preferred not to make any comment on these fundamental differences between the two men. "Mom, are you okay? You seem different, but I don't know. More." Decided. Patricia had always been reasonably perceptive when she wanted to be, but she never had the real courage to deepen her perceptions or act on them. It was easier to live on the surface of things, pretending that everything was fine, avoiding conflict at all costs. "I'm fine, my daughter. In fact, I'm better than I've been in recent months." I spent the rest of the morning organizing my few things in the room, separating what I really needed to take. There wasn't much to pack. I had brought little when I moved in 8 months ago, and would take even less when I left for good. Life becomes simpler and freer when you learn to clearly distinguish between what is really necessary and what is just superfluous or sentimental. James appeared at lunchtime with that poorly disguised hangover face and the visibly sour mood that characterized his post-get-together Saturday mornings. He greeted me with a minimal nod, as if the serious insults of Tuesday had never happened or were a minor misunderstanding that didn't deserve further consideration. We sat at the table, me, him, Patricia, and the children, in an atmosphere that could literally be cut with a knife. The tension was palpable, but we all pretended it was a normal, harmonious Saturday lunch. It was Emma who broke the heavy silence with her childish spontaneity. "Grandma, what's the surprise you talked about on the phone yesterday?" "I can't stand the curiosity anymore." James suddenly looked up from his plate, suddenly interested and alert. Patricia also looked at me with growing curiosity and a little apprehension. "Ah, the surprise." I smiled genuinely at my granddaughter. Grandma got a new little place to live, a place all her own, with a beautiful view of a park and a balcony where you can play freely. Patricia's fork literally stopped halfway to her mouth. James frowned deeply, clearly confused and beginning to get alarmed. "What do you mean, a new little place?" Patricia asked, her voice slightly tense and controlled. "I bought an apartment, my daughter. It's smaller than this house, but it's completely mine. I'm moving in next week." The silence that followed was absolutely deafening. I could practically hear the thoughts spinning frantically in James's head. How did she buy it? With what money? Where the hell did this money that I didn't know existed come from? "Mom," Patricia finally found her voice after a few seconds of shock. This is very sudden. Are you absolutely sure it's a good idea to live alone at your age? I'm 74, Patricia, not 94. I'm perfectly capable of taking care of myself, physically and mentally. But the money..." James couldn't contain himself any longer. "Where did you get the money to buy an apartment? How much did that cost?" There it was. The question he had been dying to ask since he heard the word bought, but trying to disguise it as legitimate family concern. "Why, James," I replied with all the calm and irony in the world. "You yourself said I needed to stop being a burden and take care of my own life." "That's exactly what I did." He blushed visibly, remembering his own cruel words. Patricia looked alternately at me and at him, clearly uncomfortable with the direction the conversation was taking. "It's just strange that you never mentioned having money saved for these things." "There's a lot I never mentioned, James, and there's a lot you never asked." I paused significantly and calculatedly. "You always assumed you knew everything about my financial situation, based only on what you saw and wanted to see." "But Mom," Patricia intervened carefully, "if you had money saved, why? Why did you ask to borrow $50 on Tuesday?" The question I had been eagerly awaiting. The moment of truth was coming faster and more naturally than I had initially planned. "Why do you think I asked, Patricia?" I let the question hang in the charged air. "What do you think was happening?" My daughter stared at me intently, and for the first time in a long time, I saw a flash of the intelligence I knew she possessed but rarely used. She was starting to connect the dots, to understand that maybe there was much more to this seemingly simple story than she had imagined. You were testing us?" "Your father taught me something very important before he passed," I said, rising from the table slowly and with dignity. "He told me that when I wanted to find out who people really were, I just had to ask them for a little help. A help that would make no difference in their lives, but would be a favor to me. The reaction would tell me absolutely everything I needed to know." The air in the room just turned to ice. It's one thing to realize you've been cruel, but it's another to realize you've been judged and found wanting. James and Patricia think the shock is over, but they still don't know the most important secret of all, the one that will dismantle their entire world. "Let's find out what it is." James had completely lost the color in his face. He was finally beginning to understand the real magnitude of what he had done, the dimension of the opportunity he had lost forever with his arrogance and cruelty. "Mary, on Tuesday I was very stressed. It was a terrible misunderstanding." "It wasn't a misunderstanding, James. It was exactly what you wanted to say. It was exactly what you think about me. And now you will have to live forever with the consequences of your own words and actions." I left the kitchen, leaving them in absolute, shocked silence. I could hear the murmur of a tense argument starting downstairs as I climbed the stairs with my head held high. Patricia, probably blaming James for his stupidity. James probably trying desperately to minimize what he had said. Both finally realizing that they had gravely underestimated the lazy old woman who lived with them out of charity. In my room, I called Dr. Medeiros. "Doctor, I think it's time to significantly speed up the process. They're starting to suspect there's much more to this story than they imagined, and the situation could get more complicated if I delay too long." "Perfect, Mrs. Mary. The documents are all ready and reviewed. I can stop by tomorrow afternoon for the final signing of everything and to personally deliver the official letter." "Yes, you can, Doctor. And Dr. Medeiros? Yes? Prepare all the foundation papers as well. I want everything to be announced and communicated at the same time. The full package." "Understood perfectly. It will be a professional and personal pleasure to help you put into practice your Robert's last and most important lesson." The last lesson of my Robert. He always said that the most important lessons in life didn't come from books or schools, but from the direct and inevitable consequences of our own choices and behaviors. James and Patricia were about to learn a lesson they would never forget as long as they lived. On Sunday afternoon, Linda appeared discreetly at the house. She didn't work on Sundays, but she said she had forgotten some things in the laundry area and took the opportunity to stop by quickly. "Miss Mary," she said when she found me alone in the kitchen, "can I tell you something?" "Of course, Linda. Feel free. I heard the argument yesterday. The walls aren't very thick, and I was in the yard hanging some clothes I brought to wash." She looked at me with a worried expression. "James was saying very ugly things about you, saying you were lying, that you didn't have any money, that you were just a stubborn old woman trying to get attention. And what else did he say? That he was going to find out where the money for the apartment came from, that he was going to investigate, that maybe you were being cheated by someone." Linda paused. "Mrs. Mary, I've been working in houses for over 20 years. I've seen a lot. And can I say something? The way they treat you isn't right. It was comforting to know that at least one person in that house saw reality without disguises. Thank you for telling me, Linda, and don't worry, everything will be resolved very soon. Are you really going to move? Yes, I am, and it will be the best decision I've made in a long time. That Sunday night, while the house slept in a tense and worried silence, I stood on my bedroom balcony, looking at the stars in the clear sky. In less than 24 hours, my life would change definitively and forever, and not just mine. The life of that whole family would be profoundly impacted by the revelations to come. I picked up my cell phone and reviewed the calculations I would present the next day. $50 in the 401k would yield half a cent per day. Half a cent. They had lost access to over $2 million because of half a cent a day. Walking up those stairs, I didn't feel the triumph I thought I would. There was no joy in watching their faces crumble. There was only a profound sadness for the daughter I had lost and a grim sense of justice. Robert's lesson was complete. But the cost was a family. I felt a soft, welcoming breeze touch my face, and, for a magical moment, I could almost feel Robert's comforting presence beside me, approving every step of the plan we had built together. "It's time, my love," I whispered to the night wind. "Let's show them what happens when you underestimate a woman who was truly loved and cared for." The stars twinkled as if they agreed with me. The lesson in applied dignity was about to begin, and it would be, as Robert had always predicted, educational and definitive. From the room next door, I heard the worried murmurs and whispered arguments of Patricia and James, probably trying desperately to understand how they had misjudged the situation so badly, how they had been so blind and arrogant. It was too late for sincere regrets. The words had been said, the masks had completely fallen, and now we would all have to live with the permanent consequences. I slept better that night than I had in many months. For the first time since Robert's death, I knew exactly what the future held for me. And it was bright, dignified, and completely mine. Monday dawned with a gray, heavy sky that seemed to perfectly mirror the tension that hung over the Scottsdale house like a dense, suffocating cloud. During breakfast, James could barely disguise his growing anxiety. His hands trembled visibly as he flipped through the financial newspaper, but his eyes didn't follow the printed words. He was clearly lost in worried thoughts about the previous day's conversation. Patricia was also different, more observant and cautious. She studied me with an attention she hadn't shown in months, as if trying to decipher a complex puzzle whose pieces didn't fit the way she expected. Every move I made was analyzed, every word weighed and measured in search of clues about my true situation. "Mom," she said when James went up to take his prolonged morning shower, Could you tell me a little more about these resources you have? It's just that I'm genuinely worried. I don't want anyone to take advantage of you financially." The irony of the situation was almost comical in its transparency. For 8 whole months, she had passively allowed her husband to humiliate and systematically disrespect me, treating me like an unwanted financial burden. Now, faced with the concrete possibility that I had my own money, she suddenly showed concern for my financial well-being. "Patricia, do you trust me as a person?" "Of course I trust you, Mom. I always have." "Then trust that I know how to perfectly take care of my own affairs. Your father taught me very well about these things." She opened her mouth as if to insist on the subject, but something in the firmness of my expression and the definitive tone of my voice made her prudently back down. There was a determination in me that she wasn't used to seeing, a firmness that perhaps vaguely reminded her of how I was before I became the silent and overly complacent mother-in-law. Dr. Medeiros arrived promptly at 2 p.m., as promised. I was waiting for him in the main living room, and when the doorbell rang, I personally went to answer the door with dignity and naturalness. Patricia came running from the kitchen, clearly curious and anxious to meet my mysterious visitor and try to extract information. "Dr. Medeiros," I greeted him warmly. "Please come in, welcome." He was the very picture of consolidated professional respectability. A dark, perfectly cut suit, a genuine leather executive briefcase, a confident but not arrogant posture. Patricia was visibly impressed by his presence and discreet elegance. "Patricia, this is Dr. John Medeiros, a lawyer specializing in estate and wealth planning law. Doctor, my daughter Patricia. A pleasure, ma'am." He greeted Patricia with a professional smile and a firm handshake. "Your mother is a very special and esteemed client of our firm." Very special and esteemed client. The words echoed in the air like an alarm bell, and I saw Patricia swallow nervously. Lawyers specializing in wealth planning don't serve clients without very significant financial resources. "Can we talk privately in the living room, Mrs. Mary?" "Of course, doctor." "Patricia, could you give us complete privacy, please? We have confidential and important matters to discuss." My daughter hesitated visibly, clearly dying to stay and hear every word of our conversation, but she had no social choice but to withdraw with forced politeness. We sat on the living room sofa, Dr. Medeiros opening his executive briefcase and taking out an organized series of documents and sealed envelopes. "I brought everything exactly as we discussed and planned," he said in a discreet and professional voice. "The completely revised new will, the incorporation papers for the charitable foundation, and the official letter explaining in detail the changes to your assets." I took the will and began to carefully read each clause. It was a legally cold and technical document, but each line represented a deep and definitive emotional decision. The substantial majority of the assets would be designated to my grandchildren through a special trust they could only access when they came of age and the foundation that would bear Robert's name. Patricia would receive $500,000, an amount that would guarantee her basic financial security, but not her parasitic dependence on me. "Are you absolutely certain of these provisions, Mrs. Mary?" Dr. Medeiros asked, strictly following the professional protocol of confirmation. "Absolute and definitive certainty." I signed each document with a completely firm and decided hand. It was impressive how such a simple act, moving a pen on paper, could have such monumental and permanent consequences in the lives of several people. "Now," he said, methodically sealing the documents in official letter-headed envelopes, "it's time for the communication letter." The letter was a masterpiece of elegant but accessible legal language. It explained, in formal but understandable terms, that due to significant and irreversible changes in the family dynamic, I had opted to completely reevaluate my testamentary provisions. It mentioned the creation of the charitable foundation in Robert's name, the acquisition of a new independent residence, and the judicious redistribution of legacies, considering the demonstrated behavior and the real needs of the beneficiaries. It was a legally polite way of saying, "You disrespected me profoundly, and now you will pay the permanent consequences for it. Would you like me to deliver the letter personally to your family members?" Dr. Medeiros asked delicately. "No, thank you, doctor. This is a conversation I need to have with them myself." He nodded understandingly. I carefully placed the letter in the sealed envelope and put it in my purse. "Mary," he said, rising to formally say goodbye, "I can sincerely say that your husband would be extremely proud of you. He always knew you had this inner strength and this dignity. You just needed to find the right moment and the right motivation to use them." After Dr. Medeiros' ceremonious departure, the house plunged into an almost palpable and suffocating tension. Patricia tried several times to strike up a conversation with me about the visit, but I kept my answers deliberately short and evasive. James arrived home from work earlier than usual, probably anxious and curious to try to understand what was happening in his house. During dinner, he made several clumsy and transparent attempts to probe me about the situation. "So, Mrs. Mary, this important lawyer who came here today, is it about matters of your Robert's inheritance?" "It's about my personal and financial affairs, James. It's just that, well, if you need help understanding these complicated legal papers, I've been working in the financial sector for 15 years. I know these legal issues well." The offer was almost insulting in its transparency. The same man who had called me a lazy old woman just 6 days before was now generously offering to help with my personal financial affairs. "Thank you for the offer, James, but I already have all the qualified professional advice I need." The children ate in relative silence, instinctively perceiving with their childish sensitivity that there was something different and tense in the family air. Emma looked at me occasionally with those big, curious eyes, feeling that something very important was about to happen, but without being able to identify exactly what. After dinner, when the children went upstairs to do their homework and take a bath, the moment I had been meticulously preparing for all week finally arrived. "James, Patricia," I said calmly, remaining seated at the table naturally, "we need to have a very important conversation." They looked at each other quickly, nervousness and apprehension clearly stamped on their faces. They sat down again in their chairs, like adult students about to receive the result of a test whose content they didn't know. "Do you remember perfectly the conversation we had last Tuesday?" I began, my voice calm but filled with authority. James instinctively lowered his eyes. "Mrs. Mary, I already explained that I was very stressed. It was a moment. You called me a lazy old woman," I interrupted firmly. "You said I needed to get a job. You said, textually, that I was a burden. You said I was living off your charity in your house." The silence that followed was filled with poorly disguised embarrassment and guilt. "And you, Patricia?" I continued, turning to my daughter. "You remained completely silent. You allowed your husband to publicly humiliate me at your own dinner table, and you didn't say a single word in my defense." "Mom, let me finish completely." My voice gained an authority that made them both immediately fall silent and pay full attention. "You two have spent the last 8 months treating me as if you were my generous benefactors, as if you were doing Christian charity by giving me a roof over my head and food to eat, as if I were a financial nuisance that you tolerated out of moral obligation." James was visibly uncomfortable, fidgeting nervously with his hands, completely avoiding my direct gaze. "You made all your assessments and judgments based solely on what you superficially saw in the sale of my husband's visible assets, the house in Mesa, the shop, some modest assets. You hastily concluded that I was financially dependent and poor, and you treated me exactly and cruelly according to that mistaken conclusion. Mom, we never." "Patricia," my voice came out harder and more definitive. "Don't blatantly lie to me. I lived in this house for 8 full months. I saw exactly how you looked at me, how you talked about me when you thought I wasn't listening. I physically felt the weight of your contempt every single day." Tears began to form in Patricia's eyes. James remained in absolute silence, finally understanding that there was no escaping this definitive conversation. "But you made a very serious and irreversible mistake," I continued methodically. "You arrogantly assumed you knew everything about my real financial situation. You never asked with genuine interest. You never truly cared. You just assumed, based on superficial appearances." I took the official letter from Dr. Medeiros out of my purse and placed it solemnly on the table, exactly between the 3 of us. "What you didn't know, couldn't imagine, and never bothered to find out is that Robert was a much more intelligent and visionary man financially than you ever imagined. For over 30 years, he systematically and strategically invested the majority of the substantial profits from the shop in a private retirement plan, a 401k that doesn't go through probate and was automatically and fully transferred to me when he died." James's eyes widened like saucers. As an experienced bank manager, he knew exactly what I was talking about and the financial implications involved. "How much?" he asked, his voice coming out like a strangled whisper. I paused dramatically and calculatedly, letting the tension and expectation grow until they became almost unbearable. $150,000,000. The impact of the words was literally physical. Patricia put her hand to her chest as if she had been punched directly in the heart. James turned completely pale, his mouth open in total shock and disbelief. $2 million, Patricia repeated slowly, as if she couldn't neurologically process the information. $2,150,000, I confirmed with mathematical precision. That, combined with other investments and the proceeds from the sale of the house and the shop, means my total net worth is approximately $2,830,000. James ran both hands over his face repeatedly, clearly calculating mentally and in desperation the astronomical magnitude of what he had lost forever. As a bank manager with 15 years of experience, he knew perfectly well that a net worth of that size yielded monthly much more than his gross annual salary. "My God," he murmured in growing desperation. "Why did you never say anything? Why did you never ask with real interest? I retorted relentlessly. In 8 full months in this house, did either of you genuinely take an interest in my financial life? Or did you just automatically assume I was a burden you carried out of obligation? Patricia began to cry openly, finally understanding the full and irreversible dimension of the situation. Mom, if we had known the truth, if you had known, you would have treated me differently. And does that make your behavior better or infinitely worse? It was a rhetorical question, but one that cut to the bone like a sharp blade. If they had treated me well only because of the money, it would be even more morally despicable than treating me badly for believing I had nothing. You judged me and treated me based solely on what you thought I was worth financially, I continued relentlessly. And now, you will have to live forever with the permanent consequences of that hasty and cruel judgment. I took the official letter and carefully opened it before them, like someone opening a court sentence. This is a formal and official communication from the office of Dr. John Medeiros, informing you of fundamental and definitive changes to my will. James was so pale he looked like he was about to faint. Patricia was sobbing softly, her hands trembling uncontrollably. Due to the serious events of last week, I have decided to completely and definitively reevaluate all my testamentary provisions. The substantial majority of the assets will be designated directly to my grandchildren through a special trust and to a charitable foundation we have created in Robert's name. And me? Patricia asked between disparity sobs. You will receive 500, an amount more than sufficient to have financial security and live comfortably, but not enough to support the parasitic lifestyle you currently lead. The math was cruel, but absolutely fair. $500,000 represented less than 18% of my total net worth. An amount that would ensure my daughter never faced real need, but that would definitely not be enough to maintain the expensive house in Scottsdale, the expensive private schools for the children, the imported cars, the annual international trips. This can't be serious. James finally found his voice, but it came out trembling and desperate. You're doing this because of a few minutes' argument? An argument? My voice took on an icy tone that made them both physically cringe. You think calling me a lazy old woman was a discussion without consequences? I was nervous about problems at the bank. It was a terrible misunderstanding. It was no misunderstanding, James. It was exactly and precisely what you thought and think about me. And now you will have to live for the rest of your lives with the permanent consequences of your own words and attitudes. I stood up from the table solemnly, the letter still in my hand. Starting tomorrow, I will officially begin transferring my things to the new apartment. You will have this entire week to process this information and decide how you want to reorganize your financial lives. Mom, please. Patricia stood up too, extending her hands toward me in a desperate plea. We can talk. We can work this out somehow. There is absolutely nothing to work out, Patricia. You made your conscious choices. I made mine. I walked slowly toward the staircase, but stopped strategically halfway and turned to face them one last time with all the dignity I possessed. Oh, and James, that $50 I asked to borrow, it would yield approximately half a cent a day in my 401k. I paused calculatedly to let the information sink in completely. You have definitively destroyed your family's chance of legally accessing over $2 million because of half a cent a day. Some truths are so heavy they can shatter a family in an instant. With that single, devastating calculation, Mary has just delivered the final blow. A lesson in dignity that is as cruel as it is just. But what happens after a bomb like this goes off? Keep listening to see how James and Patricia deal with the wreckage of the lives they once knew. The expression of absolute and irreversible despair on his face was almost satisfying. Almost. I went up the stairs, leaving them in the living room, completely immersed in the heavy, desperate silence of someone who finally understands the astronomical magnitude of an irreversible mistake. Behind me, I heard the muffled sound of Patricia crying uncontrollably, and the tense, desperate voice of James, trying to mentally process what had just happened to their lives. In my room, I closed the door carefully and sat on the bed, trembling slightly from the intense rush of adrenaline. It was done. After a week of meticulous and strategic preparation, the full truth had been revealed. There was no turning back. I picked up my cell phone and called Dr. Medeiros. "Doctor, it's Mary. It's done. They know absolutely everything." How did they react? Exactly as Robert predicted they would. There was a reflective pause on the other end of the line. "Mrs. Mary, are you all right?" I know it wasn't easy emotionally. "I'm fine. In fact, I'm better than I've felt in the last 2 years. For the first time since Robert's death, I feel like I'm completely in control of my own life. Your husband would be extremely proud." After hanging up, I sat in the darkness of my room, listening to the muffled sounds of an intense and desperate argument on the floor below. Raised voices, words of mutual recrimination, the sound of someone slamming their hand on the table. My life had changed definitively and irreversibly forever, and so had theirs. The lesson in applied dignity had just been executed with surgical precision. The night that followed the revelation was one of the longest and most tense of my life. Through the not-so-thick walls of the house, I heard clear fragments of the argument that went on until almost 4 the morning between Patricia and James. Raised voices, bitter mutual accusations, the repetitive sound of someone pacing nervously. "You and your big, stupid mouth" was the phrase I could most clearly distinguish from Patricia's desperate voice. How was I supposed to know the old woman had over $2 million hidden away? Was James's defensive and equally desperate response. $2 million, James. $2,830,000. The desperation in her voice was almost palpable through the wall. "No, $500,000 won't even be enough for a down payment on a decent apartment." His voice now tearful and desperate. Around 4 a.m., the house finally fell completely silent, but I couldn't sleep properly. I lay in the dark, watching the familiar shadows on the ceiling, thinking about the decades I had spent beside Robert and how he always said that people show their true nature in 2 specific situations: when they believe they have absolute power over you, or when they discover they have no power at all. On Tuesday morning, the atmosphere in the house was dense and heavy, like molten lead. I went down for breakfast and found only Patricia in the kitchen, with red and extremely swollen eyes from crying all night. James had left much earlier than usual, probably to avoid facing me directly and having to deal with the consequences of his own behavior. "Mom," she said as soon as she saw me, her voice completely hoarse and tired. "We need to talk, please." "We already talked last night, Patricia." "No, please, listen to me carefully." She approached, her hands trembling visibly. "I know we were wrong. I know I was gravely wrong. But you're my mother. I'm your only daughter. And what does that mean exactly?" The direct question caught her completely off guard. She automatically expected biological family ties to be more important than respect, dignity, and basic consideration. It means that family forgives. Family overcomes differences and problems. Family also respects each other, Patricia, and you didn't respect me one bit. I sat at the table with my cup of coffee, watching my daughter desperately struggle with the direct consequences of her own conscious choices. It was painful to watch, but absolutely necessary. "Mom, James is completely desperate. He spent the whole night doing calculations, researching on the internet, calling colleagues from the bank. You know his situation at work isn't good, that he could be demoted at any moment. And what does that have to do with me? Everything. If he gets demoted, we won't be able to keep this house, the kids' private schools, the standard of living they're used to." There it was, the naked truth, without disguises or pretenses. It wasn't genuine remorse for what they had done to me. It was pure panic over the financial consequences they would have to face. It was the desperation of someone who had lost access to a source of money, exactly when they needed it most. "Are you asking me to financially support you?" "That's not it," she hurried to deny. But we both knew it was exactly that. "It's just that you have so much money, much more than you can spend. And we're family." "Family." I repeated the word slowly, savoring its irony. "Last Tuesday, when your husband publicly humiliated me at this very table, family meant staying completely silent and letting him call me a lazy old woman. Today, when you found out I have substantial money, family means having an automatic right to that money." Tears started streaming down her face again, but they weren't tears of genuine repentance or true remorse. They were tears of pure frustration from someone who had lost a gigantic opportunity due to sheer stupidity and arrogance. "I'm moving out for good today," I announced firmly, finishing my coffee. "I've already hired a company to take my things." "Mom, don't do this to us. The children will miss you so much." "The children know perfectly well where to find me and will always be welcomed with open arms in my apartment." "And me? Am I not welcome?" The question hung in the charged air between us. For a moment, I saw a glimpse of the child Patricia, the little girl I had raised with so much love, care, and dedication. "Patricia, you will always be my daughter. That will never change. But you made conscious choices. You chose to remain silent when you should have defended me. You chose superficial domestic peace over my basic dignity. Now you have to live with and deal with those choices. But $500,000, Mom, that will only be enough for a small apartment. How are we going to start over? Then maybe you should consider starting over with less material ambition, a simpler, more honest life within your own means." The irony was not lost on either of us. They would have to learn to live with less, something I had done my whole life by conscious choice, while Robert saved resources for moments like this. At 2 p.m., the moving company arrived promptly. Two friendly and professional men who were genuinely surprised by the small amount of belongings I had to transport. 2 medium-sized suitcases of clothes, some beloved books, my laptop, a few photographs in frames, my knitting materials, and little else. "Is that really all, ma'am?" one of them asked, clearly surprised. "That's all. A whole life fits into very little when you learn to clearly distinguish what really matters from what is just superfluous." Patricia watched the move from her bedroom window, without the courage to come down and say a proper goodbye. James had called from the bank, saying he couldn't leave work, a transparent and cowardly excuse to avoid the embarrassment of a direct confrontation. But the children were there. Emma and Noah ran to hug me as soon as they got home from school and saw the small moving truck parked at the condominium's gate. "Grandma, are you really leaving?" Emma asked, her big eyes filled with confusion and sadness. "Yes, my princess, but Grandma has found a beautiful new house with a big balcony that looks out onto a park full of trees. You'll be able to visit me whenever you want, and you'll love playing there. But why can't you stay here with us?" How do you explain to an 8-year-old the complexities of adult family relationships, the fundamental issue of dignity, the high price of systematic disrespect? Sometimes adults have to make difficult and important decisions, my love. But that doesn't change the fact that Grandma loves you more than anything in the world. Noah, at 5, just hugged me with all the strength his little arms could muster, as if he could stop me from leaving through the intensity of the hug. I solemnly promised them that next weekend we would go to the park near my new apartment, that we would make popcorn and watch cartoons together, that I would continue to knit the cardigans they loved so much. "And the cardigan you were making for Emma?" Patricia asked when she finally came down, taking advantage of the children's presence to try an indirect approach. "I'll finish it in my apartment and give it to her on Saturday when she comes to visit." The message was clear and final. The children were always welcome, but she would have to completely rebuild our relationship from scratch, based on mutual respect instead of automatic family obligation. The apartment welcomed me with its bright and airy rooms, the spacious balcony with a privileged view of the park, the blessed silence of someone who no longer has to walk on eggshells to avoid bothering anyone or being called a dead weight. It was smaller compared to the Scottsdale mansion, but it was mine, completely and absolutely mine. That first night, I prepared a simple and delicious dinner, a hearty cheese omelet and a colorful salad, and ate on the balcony, watching the people walking peacefully in the park below. Families with small children, elderly couples holding hands, young people jogging at the end of the day. Real and authentic life, not the artificial and suffocating life I had definitively left behind. My cell phone rang around 9 p.m. It was Patricia. "Mom, did you get to the apartment okay? Is everything working?" "Yes, I did. Everything is perfect. The kids kept asking when you're coming home." "I'm not coming back, Patricia. This is my home now." There was a long, heavy pause on the other end of the line. "Mom, maybe we can try to start over, Forget what happened and start from scratch? You don't forget what happened, Patricia. You learn to live with the permanent consequences. You're being very hard on us. I'm being fair, finally. In the days that followed, I received several insistent calls, some from Patricia, trying to negotiate, beg, convince through different emotional strategies, others from James himself, who finally found the courage to speak to me directly, offering apologies that sounded completely empty and desperately late. Mrs. Mary, I know I went too far. It was a moment of extreme stress. It doesn't represent who I really am. It represents exactly who you are, James. People show their true nature when they feel pressured or when they believe they have power over others. But you can't punish the whole family for my mistake. I'm not punishing anyone. I'm just protecting my assets and my dignity from people who have clearly shown they have no respect for me. A week after the move, I received a call from Linda. Mrs. Mary, can I tell you something? The atmosphere here at the house is terrible. James is impossible, nervous about everything and everyone. Patricia cries almost every day. And they keep talking about you. Talking about what, Linda? That you were cruel, that you were unfair, that family doesn't do that to family. And James has been saying he's going to find a lawyer to contest the will, that you can't be in your right mind. Linda paused. Mrs. Mary, I can't stand to hear these things anymore because I know how they treated you. I saw everything. You don't have to defend me, my dear. But I do. I saw how James talked about you when he thought no one was listening. I saw how Patricia was embarrassed, but never said anything. And now they want to make you look like the villain of the story. And how are you feeling working there? To be honest, Mrs. Mary, I'm thinking of leaving. I can't work in an environment like this anymore. They treat me badly, take their anger out on me, and on top of that, they want me to agree with the horrible things they say about you. If you want, I can recommend you to some families I know. Or if you prefer, you can come work for me a few times a week. It's not a big house, but it's a peaceful environment. Would you do that for me? Of course, Linda. You always treated me with respect. That's worth a lot. 2 weeks after the move, I received the visit I had been most eagerly awaiting. Emma and Noah, accompanied by a visibly embarrassed Patricia, who was still hopeful for some reconciliation. The children were genuinely enchanted with the apartment. They ran around the balcony, had fun watching the activity in the park below, and explored the grandchildren's room I had specially prepared for them. They helped me make homemade cookies in the new kitchen, a pure and contagious joy. Grandma, it's so cool here, Emma declared enthusiastically, sitting on the living room floor playing with Noah. It's much smaller than the other house, but it feels cozier. Smaller, but cozier. The natural wisdom of a child, capturing the essence of what really matters in life. Patricia, meanwhile, observed every detail of the apartment with clearly calculating eyes. The new, good-quality furniture, the simple but tasteful decoration, the modern television, the functional appliances. It must have cost a fortune to furnish all this, she commented as if it were nothing. It cost what was necessary to give me dignity, comfort, and peace. Mom, about that conversation we had, don't you think you might be being excessively hard on us? Patricia, stop. My voice came out firmer than I intended, making the children briefly look in our direction. Don't use the children as an excuse to try to convince me of something. If you want to talk about our relationship, come alone another day, but don't bring your financial problems into their visits. She blushed visibly, realizing that I had seen through her transparent strategy. The rest of the afternoon passed in relative peace, playing with my dear grandchildren, listening to their animated stories from school, helping Noah assemble a colorful puzzle, teaching Emma some basic knitting stitches. When it was time for them to leave, Emma hugged me tightly. Grandma, you seem happier here, don't you? The child's keen perception surprised me deeply. Why do you think so, my princess? Because you're really smiling. At the other house, you almost never really smiled. You only smiled with your mouth, but your eyes were sad. Tears formed in my eyes. If an 8-year-old child could perceive the difference so clearly, how had the adults been so blind, insensitive, and negligent? After they left, I sat on the balcony with a cup of chamomile tea, watching the sunset paint the sky in golden and orange hues. It was Saturday, my first full weekend in the new apartment, and I felt more at peace and fulfilled than I had in a long time. 3 weeks after the move, I received an unexpected call. It was James himself, but his voice sounded different, less arrogant, more humble, filled with a humility I didn't know he had. "Mrs. Mary, could you receive me for a conversation? Not to ask for money or try to reverse anything, just to apologize truly and personally." The call genuinely surprised me. Part of me had no interest in hearing James's late apologies, but another part recognized that everyone deserves at least one chance for redemption and personal growth. If you want to come, you can. But let it be absolutely clear that there will be no discussion of financial matters. I understand that completely. In fact, it was my idea. I need to look you in the eyes and take full responsibility for what I did. Maybe there was hope for James after all. People can change, especially when the consequences of their actions become impossible to ignore. A month after the move, Linda came to work for me twice a week. She had resigned from Patricia's house and now divided her time between my apartment and 2 other families in the neighborhood that I had recommended. "Mrs. Mary, you have no idea how good it is to work in a place where they treat me with respect," she told me, while organizing the kitchen. "It's been years since I felt so valued. Here you will always be treated as a person, Linda, never as a maid. The situation at Patricia's house is getting worse every day. They had to put the house up for sale. James was demoted at the bank and had his salary cut by 40%, and they fight all the time, blaming each other. I felt no pleasure at the news, no vengeful satisfaction. It was just the natural consequence of someone who had lived for years above their means, supported by arrogance and contempt for others. As night fell gently over the city, I reflected on the 5 weeks that had permanently changed my life. There was no possible or desirable turning back. The old Mary, complacent and silent, who accepted disrespect in the name of superficial family harmony, had symbolically died along with that old life. In her place was born a woman that Robert would recognize with pride, strong, independent, the absolute master of her own destiny. A woman who had definitively learned that self-love and dignity are more important than the approval of others, and that respect has no negotiable price. The lesson in applied dignity was showing its first educational effects, and I knew it was just the beginning of a new phase of life, a phase where I would finally live on my own terms with dignity and peace. 3 months have passed since I left the Scottsdale house, and I can say, without a shadow of a doubt, that they have been the most liberating and dignified 3 months of my life since Robert's death. Every morning I woke up in my apartment was a silent celebration of my regained independence and restored dignity. The routine I developed was simple, but deeply satisfying. I would wake up early, make my coffee in the kitchen that was truly mine, sit on the balcony to watch the park and wake up with me. Mothers taking children to school, executives walking hurriedly to work, elderly people taking their morning walk, real, authentic life, happening without masks, pretenses, or humiliations. On Thursdays, I regularly received visits from Dr. Medeiros to finalize the details of the charitable foundation. The project was taking shape in a more beautiful and significant way than I had imagined. We had already selected 5 young people in vulnerable situations who would receive full scholarships for technical courses in automotive mechanics, electronics, and computer programming. It was deeply moving to see Robert's generous dream come to fruition, his vision echoing through time to touch new lives. "Mrs. Mary," said Dr. Medeiros on one of these visits, organizing the papers on the table, "your husband would be extremely moved to see what you are building in his name. He always said that money only has real value when it circulates doing good," I replied, signing another document for the foundation. Sitting in an account, it's just cold numbers on a screen. The visits from my grandchildren were invariably the highlight of my weeks. Emma and Noah came to see me every Saturday, always accompanied by Patricia, who maintained a respectful and polite distance. Our conversations were cordial, but laden with the permanent weight of what could not be undone or forgotten. "How are things?" I asked one Saturday, more out of basic courtesy than genuine interest. "They're complicated," Patricia answered carefully, avoiding my direct gaze. "We had to sell the house last week. We're moving to a smaller apartment at the end of the month. It was exactly what Robert had predicted with his practical intelligence. People who build their lives on appearances, credit, and arrogance crumble quickly when real pressure comes and they lose their external supports. And James, how is he handling everything? He's adapting. The demotion at the bank was difficult, but at least he still has a job, she said quietly, as if the words burned in her mouth. He's looking for extra work on the weekends to supplement the income. I felt no pleasure at the news, no vengeful satisfaction. It wasn't cruelty I had sought, but justice and educational consequences. They were learning to live within their real means. Something that should have happened many years ago. The children are handling all these changes well. They ask about you every day. They want to know if they can spend part of their school holidays here. Of course they can. This apartment will always be a home for them too. And it was true. The grandchildren's room had become Emma and Noah's favorite place when they came to visit. They had left some toys, books, drawings stuck on the wall. It was comforting to know that, regardless of the adults' problems, I was still the grandma they sought for affection and security. What impressed me most was how the children had naturally and quickly adapted to the new family dynamic. They didn't question why Grandma had moved out, didn't ask embarrassing questions about money or fights. They simply accepted that they now had two different homes, the apartment where they lived with their parents and Grandma's special little corner, as Emma affectionately continued to call my apartment. "Grandma," said Noah on one of these visits while we were playing in the small park below the building. "You seem more rested here." "How so, my love?" "At the other house, you always seemed tired, even when you hadn't done anything. Here, you look like you've slept well." The naive and honest wisdom of children surprising me again. I really did feel more rested, more at peace with myself. It was as if I had finally stopped carrying an invisible weight that I didn't even realize I was carrying. 6 weeks after the move, James finally appeared at my door, as he had promised on the phone. He was visibly different, thinner, his hair with more gray strands, his clothes less flashy and expensive, but, most importantly, his eyes had completely lost that characteristic arrogance I knew so well. "Mrs. Mary," he said as soon as I opened the door, "thank you very much for receiving me." I served him a simple coffee on the balcony, without much ceremony or formality. We sat in silence for a few minutes, just watching the peaceful movement of the park and the people. "I want to sincerely apologize," he said finally, his voice coming out lower and more humble than I had ever heard. "Not because I expect anything in return, but because I need to admit that I was cruel, disrespectful, and deeply unfair to you. James, please let me finish completely. I spent weeks blaming myself, saying that you were exaggerated, that you were vengeful with me. But the absolute truth is that I deserved every consequence I faced. You just showed me who I really was inside." He paused, his hands trembling slightly on the coffee cup. "I was demoted at the bank a month ago. We had to sell our house. I'm working extra on the weekends to be able to pay the basic bills." He paused, taking a deep breath. "And you know what I learned from all this? That I wasn't nearly as important as I thought, that my arrogance was built on quicksand. It was the first time I had seen James show genuine vulnerability and take real responsibility for his own actions. What are you going to do now?" "We're moving to a small apartment in Glendale. I'll continue at the bank, even demoted, and do some extra work when possible." He laughed bitterly at himself. I discovered in practice that a wounded pride doesn't pay the supermarket bill. "And your family?" "Patricia has been incredible, much stronger and more capable than I imagined. She's taking care of everything, organizing the move, looking for ways to save. The children, they're adapting better than me to the new, simpler reality." We sat in comfortable silence for a few more minutes, then he stood up to leave. "Mrs. Mary, I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but I wanted you to know that I completely understood the lesson and that I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying to be the man my family really deserves to have." After he left, I reflected for a long time on the conversation. I didn't feel anger toward James, nor satisfaction with his social downfall. I felt only a kind of peace, the feeling that justice had followed its natural and educational course. It was never truly about the money. It was about dignity. James's apology shows that Robert's lesson has been fully learned, not just in his wallet, but in his soul. Now, Mary can finally close this chapter, but what does the future look like when you have to rebuild a family from the ashes of such a painful truth? Let's listen to her final reflections. The months continued to pass, and my new life became completely consolidated. In addition to the regular visits from my grandchildren and the rewarding work with the foundation, I started participating in a book club at the neighborhood library. I made genuine friendships with some neighbors. I started attending the church that Robert and I used to go to when we were younger. It was a simple life, but rich in purpose, meaning, and dignity. There was no unnecessary drama, no constant tension, no need to walk on eggshells to avoid bothering anyone. It was finally a life completely my own. Patricia started visiting me alone, without the children, once a month. Our conversations were cautious at first, but gradually became more honest and direct. She was changing slowly, maturing, learning to be more independent and to make her own decisions. "Mom," she said on one of these visits, 4 months after the revelation, "I wanted to say that I understood why you did what you did, and that you were right. Patricia, let me speak." I became a complacent and passive person, a person who accepted that my husband disrespected my mother because it was more comfortable than confronting him. "I thought I had a right to your money simply because I was your daughter, without ever having considered whether I deserved that right." Her words surprised me with their honesty and maturity. We moved to Glendale last week. It's a small 2-bedroom apartment, very simple. She paused reflectively. "And you know what? For the first time in years, I feel at peace." "How so?" "Constantly living above our means was killing me with chronic anxiety, always worried about bills, always depending on others to maintain a standard of living that wasn't genuinely ours. Now, for the first time in many years, we are living honestly with what we really have." It was exactly what Robert always said. Living with less, but living with honesty and dignity, brings much more peace than living with much at the expense of others. "And James, how is he handling all these changes?" Patricia sighed. "He's growing. It was a brutal shock for him to discover that actions have real and permanent consequences. But he's working hard, both at the bank and on the weekend extras. It's a humble but honest new beginning." 5 months after the move, on the anniversary of Robert's death, the whole family gathered at the cemetery for a visit to his grave. It was the first time in months that we were all together. "Me, Patricia, James, Emma, and Noah." "Grandpa," said Emma, placing fresh flowers on the grave carefully. "Grandma said you were very smart and that you took care of her even after you went to heaven." Noah, still only 5 but more articulate, added, "Grandpa, Grandma now lives in a cool place and helps poor boys learn a trade, just like you did in the shop." I smiled through emotional tears. The children had perfectly summarized what had happened. Robert had taken care of me even after he was gone, and I was using that care to take care of others in his name. That night, back in my apartment, I sat on the balcony with a cup of chamomile tea and the new cardigan I was finishing for Noah. It was a clear night, with many stars visible despite the city lights. "Robert," I whispered to the gentle wind, "I hope you're proud. I used everything you taught me about dignity and justice." A welcoming breeze touched my face like a celestial caress. For a magical moment, I could almost feel his presence there with me, approving every difficult choice I had made. I thought about the seemingly simple request for $50 that had initiated this whole profound transformation. $50. That was worth half a cent a day, in my 401k. But that had revealed truths about character, respect, and dignity that were worth infinitely more than any money. Today, from my sunny apartment, I manage my assets of $2,830,000 and the foundation that bears Robert's name, helping young people in vulnerable situations to build their own lives with dignity and honest work. My life is not one of ostentatious luxury, but of deep peace and purpose, a peace that has no price. Patricia calls me regularly. Our relationship slowly rebuilt on solid foundations of mutual respect instead of automatic family obligation. James, transformed by the experience, learned the value of humility and honest work. The children are growing up in a more united, more honest, and less materialistic family. Linda works for me twice a week and often comments on how different it is to work in an environment where she is treated with dignity. Mrs. Mary, here I feel like a person, not a maid, she once told me. Sometimes, while I'm embroidering or knitting on the balcony, I smile remembering that request for $50 that changed everything. They thought my value could fit in a $50 bill, but my husband had given me the wisdom to understand that true wealth is not the money you have, but the dignity that no one can take away from you. And dignity, I discovered definitively, is the only asset that really matters. The consequences of that Tuesday continue to echo to this day. There is no complete reconciliation. Some words cannot be unsaid. Some wounds leave permanent scars. But there is mutual respect gained. There is painful, but real, personal growth. There are lessons learned in practice. Patricia knows that she has forever lost the chance to be my main heir. James carries the weight of knowing that he destroyed the family's financial security through arrogance, but both have become more honest and humble people through the consequences of their own choices. I have become the woman Robert always knew I could be: independent, dignified, generous to those who deserve it, but inflexible when it comes to self-respect. Finally, at my age, I have found true peace. It's not the kind of peace that comes from material abundance, but a peace deep in my soul. It came the day I realized that I don't need to live for anyone else's approval. My self-respect is the one thing that can't be traded away. It turns out, that request for $50 was the very door that opened up a new life for me. My life turned a new page at 74, and I believe that any one of us can do the same. Please subscribe to the channel to join me in sharing more stories about the journey of finding oneself. Thank you all so much.